Welcome to the Cultivating Success podcast. Jeff Sophir and Jonathan Wolfson are brothers and business partners of the top landscaping company, Nature's Experts. Nature's Experts is home to 6 companies that cater to all your outdoor needs. To learn more about Jeff and Jonathan, simply visit us at www.naturesexperts.com. On the podcast, Jeff and Jonathan bring together other business owners and entrepreneurs to share with you how they developed a prosperous company and how you can too. You will gain insights and meaningful advice on creating the building blocks to success and longevity in the entrepreneurial realm. And now, here are your hosts, Jeff Sophir and Jonathan Wolfson.
Good morning, Lynne. Thank you for joining us on the Cultivating Success podcast today. We are really excited to have you here today. As always, we want to continue to make sure we're continuing to grow our minds with connecting with other like-minded people to really kind of continue to cultivate and grow and develop each other with different ideas and strategies with different parts of the market. So we're excited to have you here to have your business consulting and your business attorney strategies to see how we can actually help all of our listeners.
Well, good morning, Jonathan. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. I'm very excited about being here with you, and hopefully some of the things I can share will help you.
Well, we're not just here for me. We're definitely here for everyone who's listening also too. We want to make sure that, we can always deliver new, interesting information that can really dial in from your perspective and mine. That's real business owners. We're not people who are consulting only. You're actually dealing with real business owners. We are a real business owner. So I really would like to dive into exactly what you do. There's 2 different focuses in your business. You are a business attorney, and you have also done business consulting now. So I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about each one and kind of describe how they both kind of work together.
Well, as an attorney, when I was practicing, I was always like behind the desk, papering deals, essentially writing contracts, doing negotiations and things like that. So I wanted to learn, like you're saying, I mean, we're here to teach people who are listening to this, and hopefully they can pick up some of the ideas that we share here. But I also wanted to learn more about the life of an entrepreneur. So eventually, as a business attorney, I did a pretty large deal and handled it primarily by myself. But when I saw it was for real estate investment trust, and when I saw the list of partners on there, I'm like, I'm not really making any difference at all in the lives of these people. So I ultimately decided to go out and open my own practice, which meant then I had to learn the other side of the table, which is being an entrepreneur and bringing clients in. And at first, it wasn't that difficult.
Two different functions.
Absolutely.
Not every attorney is a good business person, and not every good business person that is an attorney is a good attorney.
Exactly. And I've seen bad on both sides. And, I've had my clients make some really bad mistakes, which I've learned from. Usually, if they've already signed a contract or whatever, and then they come to me, it's kind of too late because there's no negotiation. They've signed something. And I guess that's one of the things I would say to people who are listening is be sure to get the right professional help when you need it. But instead of waiting until something goes wrong, because then it's more expensive and it can lead to a lot more stress and damage to your business. But
it really goes to relationships though, because
Absolutely.
developing a good, successful business, at a point, you need to make sure you have all the resources. And having all the resources is having legal advice. It might not actually be a business attorney. It could just be an attorney. And, it's trial by error moving forward. Not having one is not a good plan. Having one is a good plan. But then knowing what to look for in a better one is a good idea also too, because as your business grows, the attorney that you choose may or may not continue to grow with the needs of your business. We have found for us, we actually have different attorneys that help with different components to get the proper advice, because one singular attorney can't help with every single business problem. Typically, people are trained specifically for specific, functions in the business, whether it's employment, whether it's contracts, whether it's, different things like that.
Agreed. And what I found with my clients was that they needed more than just legal advice. So that's when I took up the consulting piece. I went to a business event by Tony Robbins, Business Mastery. And I knew that It was so generalized. There's so much that he tries to teach, and, you get overall concepts and principles. So while I was actually at that event, I started a group. It's like, let's implement this stuff together. And that group lasted, it's still going on actually. So it's going on to 6 years.
Oh,
But
cool.
it's really great. I've got about 2,600 people in the group, but we met every single Monday night during that time. And the reason I wanted to do it was, number one, to implement what I learned, to learn more, because I hadn't really, as an attorney on the attorney side of the table, been able to pick up on all these principles and things. And then, leading it actually was pressure for me to stay on top of all of these principles. And then, I just kept taking deeper and deeper dives. So, as
Putting
I
yourself
continue,
in a leadership position is really the key kind of to continuing to grow yourself. Because
absolutely.
typically when you are a leader, you're never really prepared. And as you continue to lead, you should be growing the people around you to where you've
Absolutely.
been, to where you still have to figure out where you want to go. So
Right.
it's a constant evolving process to be a leader that really is extremely rewarding, but it's also really stressful because you have to
Mhm.
constantly surround yourself with new ideas, new people. You created like this large mastermind, which is really interesting, of people that it doesn't really matter what service you're in, principles of business really align, and
Mhm.
situations aren't ever the same, period. Like there is no like exact same situation. So it doesn't really matter if you're selling spoons or if you're selling landscaping or if you're selling real estate. There's negotiation, there's principles, there's tactics, there's different things that you have to kind of pick and choose from your arsenal of experience.
Exactly. Exactly. And I definitely got to expand doing that. So that's when I decided to just add the consulting piece in, because a lot of my clients who were buying businesses, buying assets, or doing whatever it was that they were doing, needed just a little bit more guidance than the legal stuff. I mean, I can tell them to go and incorporate and keep their books up to date. I can tell them, to sign contracts with people they're doing business with, to make sure they have employment agreements. I mean, NDA agreements, or non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, for if they're discussing something that's confidential with somebody else. I mean, there's so many things that I can, provide as a legal person, but from a practical perspective, um, as they're doing things, I can see, like, one client in particular bought a business with rentals on it. It was a hospitality type business, and she knew absolutely nothing about it. The buildings were older. So I got in there and I'm like starting to brainstorm with her. Okay, you've got this shop. Why don't you offer sandwiches? Why don't you, all these kinds of things. And attorneys don't always do that kind of stuff. So I enjoy the consulting piece, because then I can see really tangible results of how principles and ideas and things that we share can actually make a big difference for a business. And from the consulting perspective and the leadership perspective, if you're in business, you're in a leadership position. So if you have teams, if you have employees, you have to be on stage, or you have to be the person at all times to lead and show the example of how you want your business run for all of that. So
Definitely interesting because you have to wear two specific hats, because being an attorney, you don't specifically give opinions, really. You know what I mean? You
right,
give scenarios for the person to choose. So you
right,
really almost have to actually wear two different hats. One hat
absolutely.
is your attorney hat and say, this is what you want. This is your answer. This is what you should do.
Hmm.
I advise you do one of these different options. The thing is, when you get to know people though, and you get to know what they like to do, what they don't like to do, what they're trying to achieve through these different contracts or structure or a deal or negotiating, you do really get to actually see somebody kind of deep down exactly what they are like. And you
Hmm.
can really give really good advice that someone who even knows them might not know, because how you
Right.
handle yourself in a pressure situation, how you are looking forward to grow and develop and structure your business. These are different things that like even people around you and your colleagues might not actually see, that you're actually really trying to work on,
Right.
that you actually could be somebody who's firsthand seeing it to say, listen, hey, I see that you're really wanting to achieve this. Why don't we finish doing this and really start working on the consulting side? So is your consulting side, is it coaching more so, or like, so after you transition someone from doing, let's just say a contract and completing maybe a transaction, how do you transition the person into actually consulting?
Sometimes it is continuing to give advice, but it's not legal advice, like setting up systems and things like that. There's nothing about, it's good to have them, but it's certainly not legal advice to do that. So I can recommend to them to do that and encourage them to start building those things out. But if they want my help, then, I jump in and help them do that. But primarily, it's coaching a lot, of course, because especially people who've never been in business before and they jump into something massive like this, they really don't know how to handle things. So like now, trying to develop a really comprehensive system so that I can pretty much just hand somebody something and say, here's some of the steps that you need to follow, and then check in with them once a week. And then if they need additional help from there, we go into a different scenario with how I help them. So whether it's giving them the structure, encouraging them to do it, or then stepping in and doing it. So however they need me to show up is how I've been showing up. So
we have a business coach. A lot of our listeners know we've had him on this show actually a couple of times already. And we have a business coach. We've had one for 4 years now.
Awesome.
And it definitely starts off a little like, why do I need this random person who doesn't really know anything about me and knows very little about my business? How are they going to be able to help me? And it's interesting. It's not really a direct correlation to what they know about your business, but a direct correlation to what they know about people.
Right.
So our business coaching, whenever we have our whole entire management staff actually uses our business coach. So we can kind of share that same cohesive bond together and really be able to share experiences. If there's different problems or whatever, they can kind of problem solve, amongst us as well too. And the first thing we usually start with is a DISC assessment. And the DISC assessment is really a powerful tool by answering these different questionnaires. This is the very first thing that we did when we first joined it, and when we have new employees that go onto it, to really understand what kind of personality traits that they have. These personality traits really dictate how you really need to communicate with somebody to be an effective leader, to be an effective communicator, and to actually get things done. And knowing what type of person, if you need to be a direct, or if there's someone who's more creative, or if they're more just depending on what they actually fall with the DISC alignment, it's really something I think that is an unbelievable tool that I think that can really help you or anybody who's out there. If you're looking to, use that internally with your team, you can look up DISC assessments, and they're just questionnaires. They're a list of questionnaires, and it puts you on a DISC assessment sheet where it kind of says what your traits are and where they fall, and then what are the characteristics of that trait. So if Lynn, you take it and I take it, and I am in one category and you're in an opposite category, I know that I need to speak a certain way to you. You need to speak a certain way to me, which can make our communication much more easy, efficient, and quick. But you also have to be somebody who is actually willing to be like, I just want to talk how I want to talk. You have to be willing to understand, I'm looking to make sure we're moving the business forward or the relationship forward, and I want to make sure that they hear me.
Exactly. Absolutely. And if you don't do the DISC assessment or any of the other assessments that are out there, you can also just ask your employees, what is it that you would like to do, or your team members? And I agree with the DISC assessment. It's a phenomenal tool. But if you don't have that coach, or you don't have those resources yet, you can actually sit down and just say, what else is it that you like to do besides what your job is? What additional responsibility, and then find out what their interests are firsthand.
I love that, because the thing is, some people have a problem with starting sometimes. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying, hey, you can literally go online, look up DISC assessment, you can fill out a questionnaire, you can do it.
Absolutely.
You know what? You don't want to do that, no problem. Then just ask the person, you know what I mean? What is it that upsets you or you don't like about when I ask you to do something? Or just ask them any multitude of questions that you can understand more about their different learning style, what they like to do outside of work, you know what I mean? Like, these are all different things where you can use tools and resources, but there's no excuse for trying to better improve your communication skills.
Right. Agreed. You're responsible for how your communication is interpreted by the person you're talking to. So if you don't know how to talk to them, then you have to shift your approach until you do know how to talk to them. So, and again, like you said, the DISC assessment is very, very good about that, but also just having a conversation with people and then picking up on their cues. Um, one of the biggest concerns I hear from business owners is how, first of all, they're afraid to bring people in and train them because they might leave. So then they end up trying to take on everything for themselves. And these are for like really small businesses that are maybe just 1 or 2 people. So when they start to bring in their first employees, they're afraid to delegate and teach them too much. They may go out and compete with them and things like that. But the whole key in keeping those people is, to have your values and, all the things that people might buy into with your company established and communicated to them, and then to find out how they could take on additional responsibility and want to take on that responsibility to help you grow your business and become a part of your business versus just a paycheck employee.
I've found on some of when we first started out, me and Jeff in 2013, we bought a Sherlock Tree Company. It was a small company. It literally had 4 people plus me, and then it was 3 people and then plus me. And I was one of the trimmers. I answered the phone. I did the collections. I did the payroll. I did all of that stuff. It was a very small company at the time or whatever. And the only way to do things in the beginning is to literally just take charge and be the one who I can do anything. And people are motivated by your tenacity to get out there and make sure and be able to know that you can do anything, and that your goal is to continue to keep growing the company. You can figure out and you can say it in any fancy form or in fashion all you want to or whatever, but the proof ultimately is in the result. It is either units of something being sold or your revenue growing up or your customers or your employees, however, whatever matrix that you're particularly gauging it by internally. There is no other substitute. If you aren't actually really leading and you aren't actually in front being the one who is most proactive about moving the business forward, no one's going to follow. What are they going to believe?
Right.
And you don't really know who's going to really be along with you on the whole journey. I've found that I always want to, like at this point in our business, be transparent to people, because I don't want people to come in and then leave. It's just an aggravation. You know what I mean? It's not that it doesn't happen. It's just that it's just literally a waste of time. Please don't waste my time. I don't want to waste your time.
Right.
And, it's really something that, now, for our business, we're a small business. We want there to be upward mobility. It is the only way that we're going to continue to be successful, is that we provide upward mobility, and that we show all these different avenues that if they are willing to start here and then, step out of these different zones, that they can continue to make more money, because we are going to be leading the pack of how the business is going to keep growing. So if you're willing to take on additional responsibilities, I'm willing to keep making sure we keep growing the business moving forward.
I love that. I love exactly the way you described that. I mean, setting the example first, doing whatever it takes. And you're right. It does inspire those who are working with you. It's like, gosh, if he's working that hard, why can't I jump in there and do what he's doing or help out as much as I can? It's often a whole lot more than about a paycheck for people. They love taking on the additional responsibility. And I love how you're encouraging your employees as they come in to start at a certain place, learn that, and then keep progressing through. I think
there's just different there's different phases of a business. When we first bought that one company, it was doing like $450,000 a year, and it had a lot of overhead. We bought a business, we bought a property. There's other different things associated with it. And, there isn't another option really, this is what we have to do. This is the resources. These are the obligations. We have to make it work. I need a paycheck, so on and so forth. But not everyone is really willing to go to the nth degree. At the time we technically bought a business, right? So I could have treated it like a business, and I'm like a special owner, but I didn't. I was like, all right, I need to learn how to trim trees. I need to learn how to drive a truck. I need to learn how to back the truck up. I need to learn how to do collections. I need to learn how to do all these different functions. And whether you like them or not, you have to push the envelope of what you're comfortable with. No one particularly likes to get 50, 100 phone calls in a day. But the thing is that you need to max yourself out before you start replacing yourself and your obligations. And people do that a little too early sometimes, where they don't actually max out what they're really capable of, to where you actually can look at what you're actually inefficient. So it's okay to be really, 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 really busy. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But there is a difference between being really busy in the beginning as an entrepreneur and being inefficient. The second you start to become inefficient, you need to start figuring out how you can replace and you can use leverage. You really don't start using leverage of other people until you get to a certain size. And I think that a lot of people have heard that word, through these different, promoters out there, I would say, and business owners about using leverage. And leverage is really something you use at a higher scale, not a beginning scale. In the beginning, you need to get out there and get to work, and you need to do as much for as long as you can at the most sustained rate that you can, where you don't literally burn out, but you just want to get for us, it was like, all right, we're going to get to a certain point. And then when we get to this certain point, then we're going to replace, and then you keep hitting the same wall, and then you keep adding at the same time.
Absolutely. Well, you had, excuse me, you had it mapped out. I love the way that you did that. And I agree. If the owner doesn't know about every aspect of the business, and they don't have to be an expert. I mean, you know how to drive a truck if you have to drive a truck, right? Somebody's out and you need to go trim a tree. Now you know how to do all that stuff. But I think that the owner does need to know something about every aspect of the business and have worked in it. And that's what I encourage my clients to do. And in the beginning, most of them have to do that anyway. I was in-house and part owner of a business in South Florida as well. And I saw a very different leadership style than what you're talking about, where you encouraged people, you offered them incentives to keep moving forward. One of the owners of that business decided to lead by fear. And he just, he was basically, if you did one thing, it's like, well, when's the next thing going to be done? There was no recognition for getting the one thing done. And I saw how that impacted the morale of the employees. And ultimately that business failed because people started leaving. Now, part of having a business too is you're going to get people who don't really want to do the work. I mean, and so you got to let those go and then replace them with the people who do. And it sounds like you've got that in place with the businesses that you have. But another aspect of the business
also too, to pick up on that also too, there's a certain level of getting the right people on the bus and the wrong people off of the bus, which is
absolutely.
a certain amount of transition within your business. But
Mhm.
then also people do change. What they want
Mhm.
out of life changes.
Mhm.
What they feel about the business changes. Your alignments might change also too. So I found it's very important to be in alignment with your employees to really know them, what makes them tick. So you can
Absolutely.
actually pick up on these cues,
Mhm.
because at the same time, you don't want that toxic nature inside the business either. It's not productive.
Right.
Someone who is a really happy employee, who is doing a great job and wants to keep moving forward, next to somebody who's kind of half in, half out, it's not a great situation to be in.
Right. Well, I don't know if you've heard the old adage, or Tony Robbins said this at his event. I don't want to necessarily promote that, but one of the things he did say was, you've got to hire slowly and fire quickly. And that is such a wise thing to do. So if you see that somebody is toxic and causing problems, then you don't try to talk them down or whatever. Maybe you do at first, but then once you realize nothing's going to change, or something has changed in their life that's caused them to have that attitude, then you need to let them go as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting how you say that. Whenever people I would say management, not, for our interest, we have skilled employees.
Mm-hmm.
So skilled employees are a little bit different, I think, than management in general, because there is a certain level of loyalty. They have different needs. They definitely need to have different, money demands, and they can, get situations that come up where they get a bump in pay if I move from this company to that company. So a little bit different as far as how you would handle. But for our management, whenever someone approaches us who's saying that they're thinking about leaving, the
Mm-hmm.
very first thing I say to them is, I 100% support whatever you want to do, but I want to talk to you about this, but I'm not here to convince you. It's the
Right.
last thing that I don't want to convince you. So if you're looking to be convinced, this conversation is not going to be convinced. I'm going to tell you why I think this is a good position. I don't know why you want to leave. I want to understand why that you think that's a better opportunity than this one. So I can understand what this business needs to provide either to you or to somebody else to make it more of a long-term position. But I definitely agree with that. There is no kind of trying to convince, especially management. If you try to
Mm-hmm.
convince management or whatever, all it does is it just delays it. And it'll delay it a pretty good amount of time. You might get, a quarter or 6 months or a year, but ultimately the person's going to, their brain is going to keep growing. They're going to keep, thinking this opportunity and the grass is always greener on the other side. And it may very well be. I don't know. Every situation is really unique, but it is really interesting that you say that because, you really want to make sure you do hire slow, fire fast, but then you also too don't want to do things to make people to stay. You want them to want to stay. If you can't give them the facts and that's not enticing enough, then there isn't really anything to give. And throwing money at situations is the absolute worst thing you can do in trying to solve any solution or whatever. If it's like I said, if it's like our skilled labor that we have in our business, it's a little bit different. If the value is there, but you typically have a certain procedure of increases and they might skip a step or the timeline might be increased, sometimes it's really supply and demand related. As far as management, if you're wasting if you pay someone more money, you're ultimately just wasting that money for 6 months while they're probably still going to leave. They're still going to do what they're going to do. So you might as well literally not have that person and spend the next 6 months training the next person who is the right person to stay.
Right. Well, and I think for me, when I hear somebody is thinking about leaving anyway, there's, of course, that little red flag, I like that you said that you would have the conversation to see what that's all about. But then after you've had that conversation, for me, it would be like the trust level goes down and continuing to hold on to that person. For some of the things that happened in the business that I was involved with was that sometimes we did, talk to people about staying, what's going on and try to understand what it was, give more money, whatever it was. It wasn't always the right technique for us for sure. But then at the end of the day, we found out that they were collecting more information about our company to take to to a competitor.
That's definitely, I think, industry specific, in a service-based industry. Listen, if I tell you that we charge X and you charge Y and you're like, oh, I'm going to charge $2 less. You can't do that really.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
It's because your cost of acquisition and your customer relationship, it's not really like a function you can squeeze in there, because they could call my company and then they could call your company. And even if my price, it doesn't mean you're going to say lower than me. You might be like, oh, when I'm bidding against Jonathan, I'm going to charge X, but you never know when you're bidding against me. So you have your own business, markup, you have your own, expenses. What we charge is based upon our expenses, and what you charge should be what is based upon your expenses, not just what you feel. It's not a feeling what you charge. It should be what you need to charge to run a successful, profitable business.
Right.
To pick up on what you said about being in the back of their head, I think that's, as a business owner specifically, it's not every conversation and you don't need to take it to heart, but there is like a little something that you do need to kind of keep a little in the back of your mind when you have different conversations about where people are at. But I don't think that you have to write it off. I think that if you have a relationship before, it's relative to the time horizon before. If this is somebody you've met for a month, then yeah, it's not going to work.
Right.
If this is a relationship you've had for a year or two, then at the same time, if you want to really be part of that person's life, you have to understand what they actually want out of their life.
Agreed.
What are they really looking for out of their life? And what do they actually need, and you have to really be there for that person. Because if you're not and you're faking it, they're going to know and they're going to leave. And if you have a real relationship, you should be able to have a real conversation. Right.
I agree with that. And that was one thing that was kind of missing in this business, is that it was, I want to say, kind of a power struggle sometimes. There were two partners and they were kind of pulling at each other, but also, and because of that, I think it created probably not as an effective team with the employees. And then again, the negativity from one of the partners definitely created that whole thing. So again, the leadership really matters. And if your leaders aren't behaving properly, if they don't have values and their vision and everything in line with their business, and they're not aligned with their employees, as you were talking about, then when they make certain comments or do whatever it is to upset the employees, then and then you find out that they may be thinking about leaving or something else, then that's a different situation. And that was definitely one I was exposed to. And of course, my the hairs on the back of my neck kind of stand up a little bit more when I hear there's maybe some problems among the ranks. But you had a completely different leadership style, and you're transparent with your people. You've built relationships. And I think that's another thing that's missing in some of these businesses, is that people don't take the time to build the relationships with their own culture, with their own employees.
You bring up another good point about the different stages in a relationship and a business. There is the beginning stages and growth part of the business. And in the beginning growth parts of the business, you actually do things and you have the intention of long term, but you do things selfishly for your short term.
Right.
So I'm looking for you to help me to sell more, do more, fix more, whatever your particular job is.
Right.
I want you to stay, but regardless, this is my need. And
Right.
as you move forward, you start collecting more pieces that are going to stay longer. And I think as you do that, you get more of the option of what I'm saying, to really have a relationship conversation.
Absolutely.
Versus a need and a want conversation. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you have to build relationships in every aspect of your business, from your suppliers and vendors and customers and your employees, your partners, your stakeholders, if they're different than your partners. I mean, you have to have those relationships. You have to have transparency. And I think sharing, where your company is as far as its growth strategy and all of those other things, so that people have that option that you provide them. Again, a lot of businesses don't, to get on board and to take on more and more responsibility, do additional training and things like that to stay with you. Those are precious relationships that you want to continue to foster. But if you're in, a different kind of business, again, in startup, and you still don't know people very well, and you're, maybe the one that's having to do most of the work, then if you don't develop those relationships and then people start getting on edge, then that's when I guess you start noticing when it could be a problem and they could take off and maybe do damage to your business. But
of course.
Yeah.
But I'd like to ask a couple more questions. One of them, so I'm going to ask one question, is going to be, what is the number one mistake as it relates to your business attorney experience? Like, what is the most common mistake when you meet people, and the question that you get asked and or the situation that you're in, that's the biggest mistake you think?
I think, okay, from a legal standpoint, the most common thing that would come in is so simple. People want to sell their businesses, but their records aren't in order. They haven't kept corporate records, especially with the corporation. You have to keep resolutions, you have to do yearly meetings, you have to do those kinds of things. So we represented one company. They were selling for something like $25 million. And the other party, when they did their due diligence, saw their corporate records were incomplete. So we had to spend a couple of weeks to update all their corporate records. Now, you can't go back and backdate things. So we had to add, where they ratified all those actions. So we had to do everything from the current date back as much as 10, 15 years. So not keeping efficient records and not having systems and processes in place.
Just so you know, the records hits home for me because it's an evolving thing. Your needs for an accountant is different when you're doing hundreds of thousands, and then your needs at doing 5 are different, and then your needs at doing over 10 are different, and then your needs at doing over that are different also too. And I think people ultimately, especially entrepreneurs, you want to save the money ultimately, right?
Of course.
Like, I'm building this business, and especially at the stages from 0 to and up, it takes an immense amount of reinvesting. And the reinvesting, you're like, all right, well, so I used to pay, $1,000 for this, and then it's 2,000, then it's 3,000, then it's 10, and then it's 20, and then it's like, well, I don't need just this document. I need this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. And, it really compounds to where it seems like it's not advantageous, but I definitely know from experience, and I would say our books are still, we're looking to be more close to the actual date, like today, up to date with them.
Mhm.
Like we have obviously all of our transactions, of we know what we bill and we know what our expenses are. But
Right.
books and records of a large business are much more complex than just those two transactions. And it's really something that is a tool to make more money. And I
Mhm.
don't think people realize that spending that amount of money on having an accountant, a CPA, an in-house bookkeeper, these different things can generate a lot more money. And
Mhm.
generating a lot more money upon your exit can be worth a lot more money than what it costs you during those 10 years too.
Exactly. And, people don't, like you said, you're wanting to save money in the beginning. But
That's
if
not
it's,
something you cut corners on though. Knowing your
you can't.
numbers,
Yeah,
and doing it the right way, up
absolutely.
to date, is
Right.
not something that you can afford to do. And I know from experience, when you don't do it up to date, it is
Mhm.
not a particularly comfortable situation to be in, because you're not accurately able to pivot. And the thing is,
Right.
it's okay for things to change in business, but it's not okay not to know when you need to change, or to wait 2 months and then you literally are like, I waited 2 months too long. And guess what happened? I lost this much money. And if I
Mhm.
wouldn't have lost this money and I would have paid this person back then, I would have lost $0 and I would have made more. It's like,
Proving
it's
my
crazy,
point. Yes, it,
right?
it really
Preach,
is. Yeah,
preach.
preach, preach. Absolutely. I mean, that's, you know, probably one of the top questions that comes in, top problems or challenges or whatever. I've had clients come in after they've signed contracts to sell their business or to buy business. One in particular signed an as-is contract. So she did no due diligence before signing it. She hadn't hired an attorney to review the contract. I mean, so that turned out to be just a total mess. And she was buying a restaurant in a mall that was about to be demolished. She didn't know that because she didn't do her due diligence. She
Oh
paid
boy.
cash in a
Oh
paper bag
boy.
up front, handed it to them, signed as is, and then wanted her money back. And I couldn't
Shame.
get it back from her. I'm like, if you've already signed something, it's probably too late to come see me.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So if you're
Oh,
doing
wow.
something that big, and we're not talking small dollars here, it was over $100,000 that she put down just as a down payment. So I tried to do some, back paddling with the due diligence. I went to the mall owner and I found out when they're getting ready to tear the whole thing down, the most that she's got here is 5 or 6 months. And, for her to have to update the premises and do all of that stuff was like, uh, it was just out of the question.
Wow.
So she
So my
lost over
next
100. Go
So
ahead.
my
I'm sorry.
next question, so we answered the business attorney question. So now onto the business consulting. So
Mm-hmm.
what is the number one advice that you give them in the beginning of what they can expect from your consulting?
Well, I work with people, business owners, to try to help them find, if they're already in business, to help them find places where they're missing profits or overlooking different things that they can do. And then what I do is do a full assessment with them, and then we create a roadmap together of how they can work on one part of the business at a time in order to make those improvements. A lot of people, as the owner, think they have to do everything at once and then nothing gets done. So part of the consulting is, all right, and it's coaching added into it, but it's like, okay, the first thing you need to do is probably cut costs or raise your prices. So that makes an immediate impact in what you're doing in your business. The second thing is to get your
That
marketing
really
message
does
clear.
require some coaching, by the way, because no one wants to get rid of people or reduce costs, and nobody really wants to raise prices because they think they're going to lose customers.
Exactly.
It's definitely a conversation that I would say very few people can handle alone.
Exactly.
It's that the answer is obvious. If you're not making enough, you either need to sell more, raise your cost, or reduce your overhead, or
Right.
all three. Literally all.
Absolutely.
So I think that it is something that I personally recommend, that, if you don't have a business partner, you do need a consultant, you do need a coach, you do need an advisor, you do need someone to really be someone who understands your business to help kind of push you towards the right direction.
Absolutely.
Because it's okay to maybe not make a decision immediately, right? When you get like information, but you eventually need to get there pretty quickly. And the thing is, having somebody who's accountable that's going to say to you, John, so what did you decide to do? Did you decide to increase the price, reduce your expenses, or what direction do you think you're going to go? Because it has to be an active conversation, because it really isn't easy. Reducing your costs is a very long, arduous process that requires lots of moving parts to get your costs to come down.
Exactly.
And then the same thing for doing an increase. Doing an increase is a long process, because you have to figure out, how's that going to affect your bottom line? How much, if you lose a certain percentage of sales, what will your actual net profit be unaffected? These are all different things that, it is a hard decision, but you have to make sure that each week, each month, you're moving forward to get a better situation.
Absolutely. I agree with that. The one business I worked with, again, they weren't even breaking even, but they continued to grow. So all they were doing was increasing essentially the debt load. So growing without understanding your financials is another problem that people may not recognize. So if you don't even know what your break-even point is, truly don't understand how your profits, which is the money that you put in your pocket, you truly don't understand how the profits in a business works. So selling more at a loss is creating more debt. So you need to make sure you get a handle on how you're billing.
Especially depending on how you get paid.
Exactly.
It's a different answer for a different situation. Business could be not cash flowing and be cash negative, but it could be wildly profitable. But it might actually take you 3 or 4 years to actually see the profits.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's another place to look.
That's a whole nother conversation all on itself, because it's something that's why it's so important in the beginning years to continue to reinvest and keep your expenses down. But it is important to make sure that where you want to be, and knowing where you want to be at least makes it worth it when you aren't able to take money out, or you have to reinvest money in, because where you're going. And if you start here and you're here and you're going here, you do know you're closer to your end goal. So it's the sacrifices, if it's cash flow or different things like this, whatever, you do realize all right, well, all this money out in receivables is my money.
Right.
This is what I've been working hard. This actually is my nest egg. Unfortunately, I'm not going to see that money isn't going to actually make it to me until I get all the way over to here and things start to stabilize.
Right.
So Lynne, I have really enjoyed this conversation with you. I appreciate you being on the Cultivating Success podcast today. I'd love if you could tell our listeners where they can connect with you, if they can get help with their business consulting or any legal advice. Please let them know.
Okay. The best way to reach me is for my consulting website. It's visionaireconsulting.group. And my legal website is hamptonlegalservices.com. A quick email address is Lynne, Lynne, at lynnehampton.com. So I collect everything there, and then if I get your email, I can obviously respond, and hopefully we can find a way to help you do what you need to do. So thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
Lynne, thank you again. It was a pleasure having you here on the Cultivating Success podcast. We look forward to talking again soon. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
This has been the Cultivating Success podcast with Jeff Sophir and Jonathan Wolfson. To learn more about Jeff and Jonathan and their businesses, visit www.naturesexperts.com.